Something is eating my rose leaves. What can I spray? Again, I'm sharing with you the actual question that the client did ask. No, thanks, Elizabeth. Give you guys a minute to discuss it locally. Again, if you want to type something in, leafcutter bees, way to go, Dakota. Yes, distinctly leafcutter bees, beneficial pollinators. I always say enjoy it. It's cool. And usually, you know, and there's plenty of green foliage there. You know, a question I often ask homeowners is, you know, they'll call and say, my plant, my tree, my shrub, whatever, is dropping all kinds of leaves. The ground is covered with the leaves. And I will say, look up at the tree. Does it look fully leafed or still? Are there lots of leaves still on the plant? Does it still look fully leafed? Or does it look very, very bare? Do you have bare branches? And a lot of times, you know, they're focusing on all those leaves on the ground. And you look up at the tree and there's still plenty of green tissue, green foliage. Those leaves that are damaged, they're still photosynthesizing. And they're still producing food for the plant through photosynthesis. So again, we don't want to be applying an insecticide in this case because we want to be protecting our pollinators. What is this white stuff on my tree? This one, I actually thought it was woolly aphids when I first saw it, and I was wrong. It's something else. They looked a little bit different than I was used to woolly aphids looking. I know I talked about woolly aphids earlier on the maple, and they were grayish purple, but there's also some woolly aphids. They'll get really, really white once they develop all their white waxy filaments. Scale, Panhandle's guessing scale. Okay, this is a plant hopper nymph. A plant hopper nymph, and I took the picture and I sent it to Jim Kalish. So it was identified by Jim Kalish. And again, they do some feeding on sap, but Jim shared with me that they're a pretty rare thing that we see and usually nothing to be too concerned about. This particular sample was in late September. So about the end of the season anyway. So plant hopper nymphs. I found these growing in a ditch. What are the berries? Can I eat them? And you can see I'm really all over the table tonight. I mean, I've got tree questions. It seems like there's a lot of tree questions because you know what? The last few years we've had mostly tree questions. But that's kind of the way it is. If you're at a Ask a Master Gardener booth, if you're in the extension office, you're getting all kinds of different questions. So I'm not doing just trees or just shrubs or just vegetables. I'm trying to bring these questions up as they would come in to the extension office. What do you do for plant hopper nymphs? You don't have to do anything for them. As I said, Jim, this was in September. It was the end of the growing season. Sorry, that's okay. You can just close the door. Sorry. Excuse me. I'm teaching a class. I'm so sorry. Okay. Somebody was trying to talk to me. So that's why there's just a little bit of everything here. But anybody, what was the timing on number 10 again? The timing. Or the answer? I haven't given you the answer yet. Oh, the time of the year. Okay, good question. I should remember this one. This was emailed to me. I can't remember. I'm sorry. I'm thinking it was in June or July, but it might have been later. See how important that time of the year is? Of course, when we're getting the question, we know exactly what time of the year is. But when you take the picture and then you forget. But this is common European buckthorn. And I intentionally put this one in here for a couple of reasons. Well, just to remind you, This was a sample I ended up sending to Von Hammond, for those of you that remember Von. He still lets us send them pictures every now and then. And this thorn right here was what, sorry, the thorn right there on the tip of the branch is what gave this away, and Von identified it for me as a common buckthorn. It is toxic as well, but it's also an invasive species. So we're starting to do a lot more programming in extension. Nicole Stoner can tell you more about invasive species than I can, but one of our issue teams is invasive species. So we're trying to get people to be more aware of, what plants may eventually become invasive in a community. And this is different from noxious. A lot of invasive species are noxious weeds too, but they're not necessarily a legally noxious weed. And we're trying to discourage the planting of certain plants. And common buckthorn is one of those. But again, this looks like it could be a chokecherry. And she said, please repeat the name again. It's common buckthorn. Again, I'll say it, common buckthorn. What is this weed in my lawn, and what can I use to kill it? And this is, it's not the greatest sample. When we do training, a lot of times on weed ID, we find the best picture we can find. But when you're doing plant diagnostics, you often get samples that are not ideal. They've been in the car a little too long. So, but this is not too bad. This is actually in good shape. You can take your fingers and you can pull it apart and you can look at it closely. I don't know if some of you are seeing the little yellow balls of flowers right here. I'm trying to find a leaf. You can kind of see the leaf here. It looks kind of like a clover leaf. Trifoliate. Yeah, Dakota County is, I think you're back on common buckthorn, and yes, birds can definitely spread the plant by eating the berries. And Panhandle, you're correct. This is black medic. Okay, black medic. Can sometimes identify, it's more of a perennial. It's sometimes identified as a short-lived perennial or an annual, but it acts more like a perennial. But it can act like an annual as well. And it's most common in lawns, where the thing with lawns, when it comes to plant diagnostics, I always remind the homeowner, weeds are not a problem. Weeds are a sign of a problem. So what's the problem? Why is your lawn not competing with these weeds? So what I try to help them with when it comes to weed control in a lawn is I try to figure out, why is their lawn not competing with and shading out these weeds, rather than just giving them the answer of, here's what you'd spray to kill this plant. So, with plant diagnostics, sometimes it's taking a step back and saying, well, why does the plant or the lawn have the problem to begin with? And that's how we can best help homeowners and the clients out there. But this is black medic. It tends to grow on lawns that are compacted. So if you want to control it, we usually control it with the post-emergence herbicides. You can apply it either early, in the spring when you first start seeing it, or you can apply it in the fall. But it'll keep coming back unless the homeowner, maybe they need to be power raking if they have excess thatch. More likely, they possibly need to be doing some core aeration on the lawn. They might need to be raising the mowing height on their lawn mower. So those are the things that we need to be sharing with our clientele, not just identifying the insect, the disease, the weed, but why is the problem occurring to begin with. That's part of our diagnostics. Okay, this one you should know the answer. So different picture, but why are my tomato leaves rolling up? Could they have been sprayed with something, and can I still eat them? Not seeing any chatting. But again, this is physiological leaf roll. And it's some varieties of tomatoes are more apt to show this. It's usually related to excessive heat, maybe excess nitrogen, severe pruning, if you're the client does pruning on their plant, other environmental factors. The plant, if you unfurl the plant, if you kind of roll it open, it'll look pretty normal. It'll look like a normal leaf. The veins won't be distorted. It'll look very, very normal. But the leaves roll up, and there's really not much we can do about it. If it's an issue year after year, then this is a good example of record keeping of your varieties, and it might be time to switch to a new variety. In this particular case, you've got it growing in a black container, so those can absorb a lot of heat. And if the homeowner's only option is to grow their tomatoes in a container for some reason, then we might want to even recommend that they change their container to a different style or type. It almost looks metal, might be plastic, but it is black. And maybe that's the issue. Okay, I put these side by side on purpose, but why are my tomato leaves curled and twisted? Again, if you look really closely here, you can distinctly tell the difference between these two pictures. In the previous picture, the leaves were just folded up, rolled up, but if you unfurled them, they looked completely normal. The veins are very distorted. A lot of times this is herbicide injury. And a lot of times with herbicide injury, especially 2,4-D, some of the growth regulator herbicides, it'll cause those veins to kind of just kind of claw up together. As well as the curling, a lot of times twisting of the stem. So, and in the previous question, the question was, they're curling up, could it be herbicide? Can I still eat the tomatoes? Now that's probably what this person should have asked as well. Is it still safe to eat the tomatoes? Unfortunately, we cannot give them a science-based answer. So, because they don't do research, they don't go out and spray tomatoes with 2,4-D on purpose and then do the research to determine when the tomatoes are safe to eat. So we really don't have a science-based answer to them, and we tell my answer to people is, if it's better to be safe than sorry and not eat those tomatoes. Or if it's just a little bit of herbicide on the very tips of the leaves, I can tell them the decision is yours. I can't tell you they're perfectly safe to eat, but if you choose to eat them, that's your decision that you have to make. And that's basically our answer. And Panhandle had it right. Howard County had it right for the number 12. Okay, why are some of my raspberry leaves dying? And this was one where these two pictures were emailed to me. I love that we have email. First half of my career, everything had to be brought in as a sample. And most people are very willing to send in a picture, so I try in just about every situation where a sample's not brought to my office. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to encourage people to bring in a sample. Stem borer, I think the Panhandle that's their answer. You noticing the little hole here? It's the tips, the tips, you have the tips of the growth. So the very ends or the tips are dying back. So usually when it's from the end of a branch in, the top of a plant down, then we usually start, thinking root related, or we think stem related. And in this situation where all the rest of the plant looks perfectly fine, it's just a few stems here and there, and that kind of tells you that it might be pretty localized. So, and this is raspberry cane borer. That's the answer, raspberry cane borer. And what you would see first, what the homeowner would see first, is actually at the base of where the leaves are drying up and dying back, they might see some damage, just kind of a ring of damage around the outside of that stem. But because it's later in the season that the borer will actually bore down through the cane and then kind of overwinter in the soil. But in this case, when you tell people, if you ask people to email you pictures, tell them to take as many pictures as possible and make sure they're clear pictures. What are these spots on my hollyhock leaves? Again, this was a sample that was brought to my office. And I took a picture of the top of the leaf and turned the leaf over and look at the bottom side. And panhandle, you got it right again. Rust. This is hollyhock rust. And with rust, again, the leaves, again, that symptom, okay, it's usually yellow, usually orange. But if you turn the leaf over with a rust disease, which is a fungal disease, you will often see these raised pustules on the bottom or the underside of the leaf. And that helps to tell you. You can be in hollyhock. Good sanitation is probably the best control for hollyhock leaf rust. Just making sure you clean these plants up, remove these leaves, clean the plants up. Don't do overhead irrigation. Rarely is a fungicide control needed, although it can be if the homeowner wants to do that. Again, it would have to be early in the spring. Once it's at this stage, it's much too late. Will not help to apply a fungicide. I always remind people that fungicides do not kill fungus in most cases. There's a few exceptions. They do not kill the fungus. What they do is they prevent, you get the layer, that's why you have to get thorough coverage of the leaf surface. The fungal spore lands on that, and then when that fungal spore tries to, I use the term germinate and infect the plant, that's when it kills that spore or that germinating spore, so it cannot infect the plant. But people seem to have this sense that if I spray my plant, it's going to kill the fungus that's there, so next year I won't get it. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And how do you get rid of cane borers? The way you get rid of cane borers, let me go back to that one. You were wondering about how to get rid of cane borers. The adult is actually a beetle, okay? And they can emerge in a little bit later, probably June. They're not real common. So if you wanted to control them, once they're inside, it's like any borer, once they're inside the stem, you really can't control them. You could, if you notice some of this browning early in the season on the tip, you could prune about 8 inches. Sometimes, like I said, you'll notice a little bit of a ring of injury, maybe right below this damage. You could prune it out and discard it really early in the season. If it was a common problem and you had the issue, you'd have to know about the time of the year for your area, that it's commonly infesting plants or the beetle is present, and that's when you'd have to be doing any spraying. So again, if you had a June-bearing raspberry, that wouldn't work very well. So most of the time, luckily, it's not a real common issue. But pruning, so mechanically pruning and mechanically discarding that material, so sanitation might be helpful. Otherwise, it's a matter of we're dealing with an edible plant. So to try to apply a systemic or something like that typically is not feasible. Why are my apples rotting on the bottom? I diagnose this as bitter rot, especially if given the concentric rings. There's another disease called white rot that can be quite similar to this on apples. And the only way I would have known, the homeowner, I asked them if they wanted me to send in a sample, and they did not. So In this case, we diagnosed it as bitter rot, and in this, they did not want to do any kind of spraying, so we just recommended that they do a lot of sanitation and clean up and discard any apple that was infected. They hadn't had the issue in past years, so they were just going to wait and see. In this case, the homeowner just wanted to wait and see if it would continue to be a major problem. But bitter rot is a fungal disease, and you kind of get sunken lesions, or sometimes with this little bit of a concentric ring in it. Okay, so and if the fungus can overwinter in dead wood or even the mummies of these fruits, so that sanitation is very, very important. Same thing with white rot; it's similar situation. So sanitation is probably most critical. With white rot, I believe the pathogen, the fungus, can actually overwinter on the plant, like in cracks and crevices. So it's a difficult one to control, but you'd have to, if you applied a fungicide, it would have to be applied early in the spring, just as the tree is leafing out, and probably right at petal drop when that small fruit is starting to develop. I agree, Nicole, it kind of looks like blossom end rot.